Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, I want to do a series, okay, on somebody who I think is very important in I want to say in the cluster B world. Okay, I think if you're going to talk about cluster B and you're going to look at the pop culture, okay, this is a person who I think cannot be forgotten and has to be looked at, as really on in the topic of cluster B. Um, Now, whether I think this person is a full blown cluster B, like diagnosable, that let's take a look at that. But I want to do a whole series on Teal Swan, okay? Because this is a person who, I mean, you don't have to think 2 seconds to question whether she has grandiosity. Okay, so that right there. You don't have to even think 2 seconds before you even question whether she has a lot of kind of like acolytes or like followers, sort of like have has her like minions. She has her like lackeys. So it's sort of like she already starts checking the boxes really fast on narcissism, because narcissism, you sort of like the typical narcissist, you think of them as being very exploitative and sort of using people to sort of serve them. And she does have kind of like this whole, I don't know if we want to call it a cult or like a private world where she's sort of like the queen, and everybody's sort of like serving her. So and I think it's presumed that she has this like supreme, um how would you say, like supreme authority, supreme intuition, and everybody else is just kind of like receiving from the prophet. So she definitely has that prophet complex, that very similar to like Joseph Smith, or dare I say L. Ron Hubbard. You know what I mean? So there are a lot of paradigm characteristics that really, really tick the boxes of narcissism. And let me see what else. You know, I've seen a little bit of footage of like some documentaries where you can also see that she's not very welcoming of criticism, and she's kind of, she herself can be very unstable. So it's like, whoa, there's a lot of boxes ticking for a personality disorder. So um, at the very least, anybody who's interested in cluster B, if you're looking for real examples, because most people live in the closet. Most people, you're not going to see the full blown personality unless you're in a relationship. And so we don't really have access to a lot of people. Even if somebody is diagnosable, you're not going to, unless you get into their personal life, you're not going to really see the cluster B. Cluster B is a very hidden, very private kind of thing, and you only see it when you really get to know people. So there's just these few cases where a public figure is so exposed that it's sort of like it gives you sort of like a snapshot of things you would normally never see unless you really had a relationship with a person like that. So I want to do a series on Teal Swan, and just the subject matter of Teal Swan, because she herself touches on a lot of issues like suicide. Like she touches on a lot of religious content, or like folk religious content, sort of like she's not a part of a specific religion, but I think she's sort of like a sponge, and she's sort of like picked up in the air, she picked up in the environment a lot of religious themes, a lot of themes that have to do with like past lives, reincarnation, that have to do with sort of like the real reality, like the metaphysical reality beyond the apparent reality. And so it's sort of like it's almost like you're talking about a person like on the level of like Eckhart Tolle or something like that, like sort of like a person who's not like formally part of a specific school of religious thought, but she sort of like has her own sort of like native religion, sort of like, based on just what's in the environment. Um, so there's a lot of issues here, and some of them are specifically psychological, like suicide, like the ethics of suicide, and even, just how we think about suffering and suicide. And I think, I think there's also a lot of naivete in Teal Swan, because, it's funny. I've almost never seen a person who is so unconvincing in their in their grandiose, how would you say, like her grandiose like proposed self, like what she proposes to the world. I can see so many cracks in it, and it's so unconvincing that it's almost kind of funny, really. I mean, she is kind of fundamentally, I think, a very uneducated person. Okay, really a glaringly uneducated person. And I think she is also fundamentally kind of a naive, like very naive person. I mean, my first instinct when I listened to her talk is it sounds to me like she was raised in the country. Okay, like people who are raised in the country who really don't have contact with like big city sophisticated ways of thinking. It's sort of like that syndrome of the country person, okay, who has a very kind of naive and kind of simplistic childlike view of the world, but combined with tremendous intelligence. Okay, because I think she has, I'm going to say she's probably smarter than I am. I don't feel like I'm as smart as she is. Okay, but she is naive, and I think she's very uneducated, and I think it really shows. Okay, and so like it's funny because like the typical narcissist, the typical psychopath will put sort of like a proposed sort of like ideal personality, like she proposes who she is to the public, but I think you can really see a lot of cracks in her proposed self. And so it's sort of like you're sort of dealing with this great, tremendous grandiosity on the one hand, but you can see the cracks and you can see the flaws in the proposed, or the person. You can sort of see the person underneath the proposed self. So it's sort of like if you look at the Wizard of Oz, when if you know the Wizard of Oz, at the end there's like this supposed wizard that's like a projection, okay, and the actual wizard is sort of in a little control room, and he's like this kind of nerdy, kind of insecure guy, like manipulating the actual image. And I think with Teal Swan, you can actually see the real person while you're looking at the proposed image. So it's sort of like a flawed proposed image, and then you can see the person sort of manipulating to make the image. So it's almost like you get to see like really the mechanism of how a person creates their grandiose self. Okay. Um, so anyway, so I want to do a series on it because this is a person who you don't get to see a lot of people that deeply because she's so exposed, and I don't think she realizes how much of her flaws are exposed. I think, and that's another thing too, that it's the lack of insight. Okay, so this is like such a classic example. Now, right off the bat, do I think she's diagnosable as having an actual personality disorder? I'm going to be honest. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I don't know. I will at least say that she has a lot of features. Okay, a lot of features. Cluster B is totally expressed in this person. Okay, totally expressed. All right. So I will endorse the features, okay, but the actual decision of whether someone is clinically diagnosable to where they ought to be considered mentally ill because of their personality, okay. I'm going to go ahead and say that my hunch is I don't think she's quite clinical, but she's got a ton of features, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I think she's subclinical. And the only reason I say this is because with all the chaos in her life, and she's got tons of chaos in her life. I mean, she juggles ex-boyfriends and husbands, and she doesn't get along with all of her minions. And there's all kinds of, like it's almost like dysfunctional family, her inside world. And yet I still think she's sort of held it together and sort of been able to manage her life, and have real success, okay, in a way that I just don't want to call that mental illness, okay. I want to say that she is sort of on the borderline and kind of on the subclinical side of the actual cluster B, okay, but she's got a ton of cluster B. She's almost like a cluster B, like a poster child. So it's like she's like a poster child of all the ways you can be cluster B, but I don't think she has quite the level of dysfunctionality um, to really qualify to be diagnosable. I think to be diagnosable, I think you need to really have those rock bottoms. And I'm not a person who's in the habit of taking like a big successful stockbroker or a successful lawyer who happens to be a real jerk and have a lot of cluster B symptoms. But if they can sort of hold on and sort of maintain their relationships and maintain success, I'm willing to say that person's got major problems, okay, but I'm not going to say that's mental illness. I want to reserve mental illness for people who really, really cannot function. That's just how I look at it. So my hunch is that now, of course, I'm not saying for sure. It's just my hunch. This is different from how, let's say, when I looked at Meghan Markle, I really gave an opinion that I don't think she's actually clinical. Okay, that was my opinion. With with Teal Swan, it's my hunch. Okay, it's a hunch. It's not quite an opinion. Um, and I think she's close. I think she's close, but I just think she's got too many features of functionality, and I think she has too many features of sort of holding relationships, even though she juggles them like crazy, and even though they're full of all kinds of toxicity and chaos and stuff. But I just want to think that she's probably on the subclinical side of the border, but with tons of cluster B features, almost to the point where she could be like a poster child for cluster B. It's crazy. Um, and I mean, in a sense, she is kind of like say like Donald Trump. She's sort of like, how would you say? She's sort of like a flaming example. Like it's almost too flaming. It's so flaming that makes me sort of reserve my opinion. You know what I mean? Because like it's just too. It's almost outrageous. And I think subconsciously, I think Teal Swan, deep down inside, I think she knows deep down inside she's more of a performer and more of a spectacle than an actual whatever she proposes to be. I think deep down inside she knows she's doing show business. I think she knows she's being like a public figure, like it's almost like a character. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of the question we always have with Donald Trump. Is he really that, or is that the character he is? It's sort of in the borderline, because I'm sure in personal life, I'm sure Donald Trump's a total asshole. But I just think that there's something about the public presentation, and I just want to think that fundamentally, I think Teal Swan, kind of like Joseph Smith and kind of like L. Ron Hubbard, they present as having a profit complex, but I think fundamentally what they are is performers. It's their performance, and so I think that deep down inside, I think she knows she's a performer, and that's what her I say what she brings to the world, what she's born to do, and what makes her successful is that she gives a very powerful, impactful performance. Okay. So I don't really think that what makes Teal Swan is really the content of her ideas or the quality of her ideas. I think it is the performance. And I think she does perform the role of the prophet and the supreme source, or the transmitter of the supreme source. Like she is uniquely situated to communicate to us the content of the prime source, the ultimate source. So that is the prophet. Okay, so you're looking at somebody who the proposed character is the prophet, and I think she has a genuine prophet complex, like Joseph Smith and like L. Ron Hubbard. Okay, and maybe to some degree, I think another person with a prophet complex was a Werner Erhard from Est and later Landmark Education. I think you have to see these things. These are groups that, at their core, they come out of someone who has a prophet complex. Okay, and so I think this is something that really does appear in the world, and I think it is something that really impacts society. I don't think we as Westerners, I don't think we appreciate how much the EST program and the Landmark Education program really put a mark on Western culture. Okay, I don't think we realize it because I think they kind of slipped in, kind of almost kind of under the radar. But I think a lot of our modern vocabulary and our modern way of thinking has a real imprint from Werner Erhard and Est and Landmark Education. Even though it is really kind of a ridiculous group, and they probably have wasted a lot of people's time and money, and they probably do they traffic in a lot of like kind of people that are really hopeless, and it's sad to see them taking advantage of people that are really that don't really have a lot of autonomy. People that are really disadvantaged, and because it's so cheap, they can really churn through a lot of people and just make a lot of money. So it's hard to watch, but I think they have been influential. And so, Scientology and landmark education, they're kind of like a whole family of kind of seemingly fringe cults, but they really have a lot of influence. I think we should be very careful because maybe Teal Swan is really part of also sort of a mode of consciousness that has a lot of influence. Now, I'm not saying Teal Swan is on the same level as Eckhart Tolle, but I don't think we want to underestimate how much influence Teal Swan has. Okay. And again, I don't think it's a specific content of what she's saying. I don't think her content's really that rich. It doesn't really have that much, there's not much vitamin in it or even calories, I don't think. But I just think that she is resonating with sort of a kind of a folk religion that's sort of just in the atmosphere, sort of in the environment. And I think she is kind of pushing buttons and sort of resonating with a certain, I don't know, a certain kind of religiosity that's like a folk religiosity that is in the modern world, that is in the contemporary world. Okay, so um, anyway, so when I look at those things, I think immediately we want to be careful not to just limit ourselves to cluster B. Okay. I think if anything, even if she's subclinical, okay, I think Teal Swan is probably cluster B plus other stuff. Okay. The same way, you cannot just say, it would be irresponsible to say that L. Ron Hubbard was just a narcissist or just a psychopath. Okay. There was more going on. Okay. L. Ron Hubbard had delusions and he had religious complexes that goes way beyond just cluster B. So, in that sense, I think what we see with Lori Vallow is also relevant because Lori Vallow was not diagnosed as just cluster B. She was diagnosed as cluster B with religious delusions. Okay, delusional disorder, religious type. Okay, so likewise, I think we need to be honest and responsible. And so, if we're going to try to classify L. Ron Hubbard, okay, or Joseph Smith, likewise, we could say there's cluster B, but there's also religious delusion or religious complex. Some kind of religious identification that gets to the point of being, like having like a messianic complex or having a prophet complex or the prophet syndrome, whatever. So basically, when I look at Teal Swan, cluster B is not enough to contain her. I think she is moving into the world of religious delusions and identifying as a prophet. So it's like a prophet complex. Okay, so that's pretty heavy. That's pretty big stuff. Okay, so let's I'll do different chapters or whatever. I'll do like part one, part two. This will be like a multi-part series. But just to fill out the rest of the time in this video, um, or actually, maybe this will just be the introduction. But anyway, okay. So like say in future videos, like in the next videos, I do want to talk a little bit about Teal Swan's upbringing, her background, her claims about being abused, and the fact that, from a very young age, she seems to be very tuned into fantasy, and fantasy seems to have a heavy expression in her personality. Okay. And her fantasies tend to be very outlandish and kind of over the top. So she is really over the top. And I think you can look at it two ways. You could say that that's a sign of grandiosity, or you could say that's a sign of being kind of flamboyant. Okay. Flamboyant. And because I think deep down inside, I think she's a performer. Okay. I think we need to be really careful not to confuse grandiosity and flamboyance. Okay. Just like Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is very flamboyant. And I think we need to be careful because, yes, there's an aspect of grandiosity to it, but I think the flamboyance is also a big thing. And I think people who are deep down inside, they're performers. And L. Ron Hubbard was like this too. L. Ron Hubbard was a big presentation. He's like an event. He's like a phenomenon, whatever. And it's not just grandiosity. I think there's a flamboyance to it. And so I think that, like it or not, I think Teal Swan has that flamboyance. And that flamboyance showed up from a very early age, that everything she did was just in capital letters. And so if she had a fantasy about being abused, it had to be off the charts, because that's just the way she is. So obviously we'll have to look at her childhood, and we'll have to look at like anecdotes from people who have been close to her and have since left her cult, I guess, her group. Former spouses, lovers, people that, there's a lot of very valuable content in the Mormon Stories podcast, because they've actually interviewed people that have been very close to Teal Swan, former friends, former lovers, people that have really gotten to know her. So that's very valuable. And so, yeah, I want to do a few videos on this. And also, finally, you cannot talk about Teal Swan without touching on a very serious question about suicide. Okay, so this is very serious stuff. So yeah, I'll do a whole series on her, and look forward to it. Yeah, thanks for watching.